Welcome to the Forever and Ever podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove, and today we're going to talk about understanding emotional processing. And as we go into this, I want us to understand that we all process things very differently. And in my book, Forever and Ever, we talk specifically about kind of two major ways of processing. And you might have noticed that you or your partner handle emotions very differently. And maybe one of you needs time to think things through before talking about them, while the other wants to address everything right away. Now, that's where this concept of wave and iceberg emotional processing come in from my book. And these are two distinct ways in which people handle their feelings. And understanding which one you are and which one your partner is may lean towards, it can really help transform the way that you are talking to one another, especially during times of heightened emotions. And it helps y'all to be able to connect and understand in those times. So let's start with number one, which is what is wave emotional processing. And this wave style processing that I described in the book, this person tends to feel their emotions more gradually. They kind of come in like a wave at a time. And at first they might seem unaffected by a situation or a conflict, but over time their feelings start to surface. And it's almost like they have like a delayed emotional response. And they need space to reflect and fully understand what it is that they're feeling before they're ready to talk about it. For example, imagine your partner is a wave processor and you have a disagreement. And at first, they might act like they're like either everything's fine or that they don't care about the situation. But a day or two later, they bring it up. It's not because they're holding a grudge. It's actually because it took them time to process and articulate their feelings, to even sometimes feel their feelings. And they can just, it's like you got to imagine, it's almost like they're feeling those emotions like in drops at a time. And the challenge here is that waves can sometimes seem distant or avoidant, but the truth is they're just sorting through their feelings at their own pace. And again, this isn't like a mental thing that we're doing. It's not like we're taking these steps like, okay, I'm gonna only allow this much emotion in it. It's just how we're built. Sometimes we're built differently. And something with a wave processor, because not only do they feel their emotions waves at a time, but they can also only handle their emotions waves at a time. And so what will typically happen is say a big fight breaks out, and rather than addressing the emotions, they might even just shut down and they don't want to talk about it. They want to just either act like nothing's wrong, or they do the cold shoulder because they don't know how to express these feelings because it's too much at once. And so now that really can create a conflict for someone who is an iceberg emotional processor. Let's talk about iceberg processors. Iceberg processors experience their emotions more immediately or intensely. It's almost like this big iceberg that forms in their hearts, in their lives, and it's like this full weight of their feelings just rise to the surface. It might have been building under that water over time, but when it does surface, it comes out all at once, demanding to be addressed right now. Like this will sink the Titanic ship. You know, this is a thing that will stop. It cannot move on until this iceberg is addressed. And if you're one of those iceberg processors, you probably find it difficult to wait for a conversation when something is bothering you. You feel like that you need to express your emotions in the moment because that unresolved feelings can feel unbearable. It feels like you're the ship that's sinking by these emotions. Like you cannot move around this thing. You can't go through this thing. Like this has to be addressed. And you're almost like stuck at sea unless these things are addressed. And the tricky part is that if an iceberg processor's partner isn't ready to engage, it can leave them feeling abandoned, unheard. And for an iceberg, validation and acknowledgement in that moment feels critical for that emotional connection. So we're kind of getting a glimpse of these two different emotional processing. And let's talk about the challenges of waves and icebergs in a relationship. And when these two styles collide, you got to picture this. An iceberg wants to dive into the emotional conversation immediately, while the wave needs to have some time to process. Again, they can only take a little bit at a time. The iceberg might feel like the wave is avoiding the issue or isn't really feeling the gravity of the emotions that they ought to be feeling, while the wave processor feels really overwhelmed by the iceberg's intensity. And one of them wants to postpone to either not talk about it at all or at least talk about it later, while one of them needs to talk about it right now. Their emotions need to be addressed. And so without understanding these differences, it can lead to big conflicts from even things that started really small. The iceberg feels ignored and the wave feels pressured. Just to be transparent, I'm more of a wave processor. My wife is more of an iceberg. And there's been that early on in our marriage, there's plenty of times to where we would get into this fight and she would need to talk about it right now. And I felt so overwhelmed by the emotions. Like I just could not feel it like that, to where times where I felt like I had to like run away. Like I felt like I had to leave the room. And one of the first big fights that we had like that, I felt so overwhelmed. I don't even know what we fought about. It was probably something trivial, but in the moment it felt like so important. But I remember I think it was like the first year that we were married. We got into this fight and she is feeling everything right now. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I said, just give me a minute. I just give me a minute. She's like, what do you mean give me a minute? And she needed to talk about it right then. And I felt so overwhelmed that I literally left the room. I left the house and just went on like a 5-minute drive. And then when I came back, she was just sitting on the couch, devastated, because when I left without saying anything, I took her emotions hostage. And so both of us felt like really overwhelmed in that moment, to where I couldn't handle this pressure that you have to unpack this right now. And she couldn't handle this feeling of abandonment, to where I just take her hostage with me. So we had to come to this agreement where we understood how we felt differently. Even though we're talking about the same thing, the way that we're processing these feelings is different. And so now it's this more of like this mutual kind of way that we're able to navigate these differences, to where we can have some practical steps and compromises that both help and guard one another. So like for us, we made this idea of to where if I'm saying I need a minute, I'm not trying to avoid it altogether. I just need time to understand how I'm feeling. I don't want to say something I'll regret. These emotions are too much for me. I can only take it a little bit at a time. But if we understand that if I say that, we can have a moment of reasonable time for non-conflict. But we're not going to go into the entire night. We're not going to go to bed without resolving this issue. So it was like this idea that we had this reasonable understanding, to where we're not going to take too much time to not talk about it, but we will allow some time. And I'm not going to take her heart hostage. I can even reaffirm and validate my commitment to her, and that and say, look, I love you. I care about you. I just need time to think about it. And just being able to communicate and affirm in not letting that silence determine what's between us, but affirming like, hey, it's not that I don't want to be with you. It's not that I don't love you. I just need time to process. And we were both able to communicate that together. So here's some practical tips for you guys. For icebergs, you need to be patient with your wave partner and give them the time that they need to process without assuming that they're avoiding you. Or try journaling or talking to a friend first to release some of that initial intensity before approaching your partner. And when I say talking to a friend, I don't mean just like bashing your spouse. I'm talking about if maybe you need to just if you need to get it out, whether it's journaling or talking to somebody that you can trust, not somebody that's going to just maybe you share, you're not bashing them, but their response is bashing your spouse. That's not necessarily healthy either. When you are ready to talk, focus on listening and validating their feelings. just as much as you'd want yours. For wave processors, let your iceberg partner know that you're not ignoring the issue. Affirm and validate that you see their feelings, that you understand their feelings, that you just need time to process. Something as simple as saying, "I hear you and I want to talk about this, but I need a little time," can go a long way. Set a specific time to revisit the conversation so your partner feels reassured that it won't be left unresolved. Say maybe it's something like, "Look, can we just wait till after we put the kids down? Can we wait till this specific time? And I feel like I'll be ready to talk about it." And then work on expressing your feelings as they come up instead of letting them build up over time. See, this is where it really big fights often come from. Us avoiding these emotions for such a long time to where we think like, I don't want to fight about it. I'm not going to bring it up until we harbor all of these emotions from our experiences or hurts or unresolved conflicts and issues to where they just blow up in these big moments. And it's often those small moments that turn into these really big moments. So finally, let's talk about some practical conflict resolution strategy. Here's a simple strategy that can work well for both waves and icebergs. Pause when conflict arises. Take a moment to pause and acknowledge that you both are feeling it differently. You're both feeling emotions, but you both process those emotions differently. Number 2, plan, set a time to discuss, like when can we talk about this, whether it's in 10 minutes, an hour, the next day. If it's something that can be talked about right now, then great. But give each other the space that you need while reassuring the conversation will happen. And then finally, practice some empathy. During the conversation, both partners should really focus on listening without judgment. Listen, not to respond, but to hear what they're saying, understand what they're saying. Waves can share their processed thoughts and icebergs can express their immediate feelings. All this to say is that sometimes just reminding each other during that conversation, we're on the same team. I want this to work. That can really make a big difference. Now, some final takeaways. The big takeaway today for this is waves and icebergs aren't wrong or incompatible. They're just different. When you understand and respect your partner's emotional processing style, you create space for both of you to feel seen, heard, and supported. Remember, the goal isn't to change how you or your partner processes those emotions. It's find ways to meet in the middle and strengthen that connection. Everything that we're talking about is not about someone being right or wrong, but us bridging the gap in where we're different. Regardless of how similar you are to somebody else, we're always going to be different from one another. So I hope that this was meaningful and edifying to your relationship, to your marriage. Thanks for spending time with me. If you haven't already, join our free Facebook group, our Forever and Ever Marriage Facebook group. You can find the link in my bio, or you could always send me a message if you're having trouble finding it. But until next time, have a great life.